Hello there and welcome to Bobeats and another video in the Summer of Synths series. So if you don't know, it's an ongoing event where I invited 5 other YouTubers to create videos for my channel because I needed a little bit of a vacation, a little bit of a break from YouTube. So I asked some friends, could you create some content that my viewers would enjoy? Maybe stuff that I couldn't cover myself on the channel, stuff that I'm not that good at. And a couple of friends said yes, I gave them a budget to create a video and here we are. So today I have a special guest. His name is SynthDad and he's gonna show us one of the most interesting groove boxes out there, the Deluge, and how to use it to create hardware synth setups.
Thanks, Bo. In this video, I'm going to talk about how I use my Deluge as the center of a hybrid synth setup, combining both hardware synths, modular gear, and even my DAW. Let's get started. Now, what do I mean by a hybrid setup? I mean one that combines, for example, modular synths, like my case here, with standard desktop synths, if you will, like this Digitone, with external MIDI controllers, like this Torso T1, or this Faderfox EC4, and even using a DAW to send MIDI information into the Deluge. So the Deluge becomes the heart of a complex setup using multiple synths, possibly multiple controllers, and a modular system. And it acts as the main brain that lets you bring everything together. Now let's do a quick overview of the Deluge and look at some of the key features it has that we're going to use in this video. Now the Deluge is an incredibly complex piece of equipment. You could have a video an hour long and it still wouldn't go over everything in great detail. So what I'm going to do is just give a super high level overview of the key things we're going to cover today. When you start the Deluge up, you might be wondering, what exactly are we looking at here? So the Deluge sequences using tracks, and each of these tracks, or clips they're called, can contain a synthesizer engine. They could be MIDI controlled, so they can play an external MIDI device. They can be audio tracks, so you can play samples, for example, one-shots like drums, or you can play loops. So if you load in audio loops from, say, Loop Masters or Splice, or if you have your own loops you've created, you can load them in here and the Deluge will automatically slot them in. You can also have CV and gate tracks, and these are used to sequence modular gear using the gate outputs here and the CV output on the back. And finally, this USB port will also accept MIDI input from, for example, a DAW like Logic. So we'll look at it in a second, how you can send MIDI information and clock from Logic into the Deluge, so you could actually augment the built-in sequencer using MIDI sequences you may have already defined in Logic. You can punch in some notes on this keypad. I'm just randomly smashing the keys here. We can adjust the parameters of the internal synth engine using these gold knobs. And I can go around here and create a kit track, for example. Now I can create a rhythmic section. So we can also record in notes using this isomorphic keyboard mode. Here's a bass patch I've loaded. I hit record. Now say we wanted to take that bass melody, but we wanted to play it on a bass patch that we had over here on the Digitone, like this one. So how would you do that on the Deluge? Well, it's very simple. You just copy the synth track here into another track. I'm going to turn this into a MIDI track. The notes are the same, but now it's going to output MIDI instead of play the internal synth engine. Set it to channel 2 here, which corresponds to track 2 on the Digitone. And now when I hit play, we'll hear the bass sound coming out of the Digitone. Now, you heard there how I can play the filter and adjust the sound on the Digitone. Say I wanted to automate that as this progression here went across. On this track, we want to automate the filter frequency sweep on the Digitone. How would you do that on the Deluge? Well, it's very, very simple. You use these knobs here in a MIDI track mapped to a parameter to set the control code you want to send. So for example, I know that the control code for filter cutoff frequency is 23 on the Digitone, so I press this gold knob here because I want to map this now to CC23, and I turn the black knob here until the display says CC23. And now when I turn this, watch the filter frequency, you see how it moves? That's because I've now mapped that control to that control change value, and so that is now adjusting the filter frequency over on the Digitone. Great, not exactly rocket science, it's a pretty standard thing. Now we can automate this by recording knob movements as we play. So I'm just adjusting the knob as I play, and the Digitone frequency of the filter is changing, and the Deluge is recording that automation. Now watch, you'll see the automation is programmed in. Great, so we've now seen how to use kit tracks to make drum rhythms with one-shots. We've seen how to use synthesizer tracks to use the internal synthesizer engine. And we've seen how easy it is to take a melody that's on an internal synthesizer track and just copy it over and make it into a MIDI melody. Now let's add one more thing into the mix, and that's using audio loops. One of my favorite things. I really like doing this because I'll download a lot of different loop packs from, say, Loop Masters, and then I'll layer them up and then add native kits from the Deluge and also the synth engines on top of it to build up a song. It's a really great way of just like adding some variation or change into your music, but also bootstrapping a song. So if you have a nice kind of riff, synth line, or a drum pattern that you want to use, you then build on top of that rather than having to program everything from scratch. So, how do we do this? First of all, I've installed quite a few of these loop samples into directories on the SD card here in the Deluge. So I'll just pop that back in. You can use any size SD card you want as long as it's FAT formatted, MS-DOS formatted. So to turn something into an audio track, you press the pad, press the black button here. It now says audio. And what I'm going to do is press Shift and Browse, which opens up the file browser. So I'm going to go down here to Deep Dubby House, which is a pack I got from Loop Masters. I'm going to scroll to Drum Loops. Not quite the style we have going on. We could try that and see what happens. Now, let's take a listen. We have a very different groove here. I'll just kill the... So you see now, we've got a very different sound. So let's go in, change that then to just be tops so that we can have a break. That way we can build. Arm that to launch. Okay, how do we hook up multiple MIDI controllers to our Deluge so we can use them to control both the synth engine in the Deluge, play some notes, but also control our external synths? Because this is the next thing we want to build in our hybrid setup. We've gone from the Deluge itself to controlling an external synth, and now we're going to add some external controllers. Pairing the Deluge with an external controller really gives you more hands-on playability. Like in this clip where I paired it with a Faderfox MX12 to give me control over volume and filter frequency. Well, the first thing you're going to need is some sort of USB cable for your controller. So I have the MicroLab here, which has its own USB cable, and I have the Faderfox EC4, which I'm going to use to control synth parameters. I've hooked them up to this simple cheap hub, this USB hub, and I've used one of these USB Type A to Type B adapters. I just got this one on Amazon. You can look them up. They're fairly inexpensive. I think about €5 for this one. And so this allows me to convert the Type A connector on the hub into a Type B connector, which is what the Deluge expects. Now, the hub will provide power, but you need to power the Deluge, otherwise there won't be enough power from the internal battery to control the external controllers. So we press Learn, and the audition pad here, you see the lights start flashing. Press Cypri, key on the controller, and now they flash white, and now it's learned. So when I press this, this will also be receiving the information to record it. So hit record here, and now we'll just play in a very simple note sequence here. Now, sometimes you can go too far. You saw there the recording. You see all the notes are recorded in here on the Deluge's pad, but I kind of missed my endpoint there. And so what I can do is just shorten this track, press Shift, and I turn this knob here to the left. The white lines come in to show I'm shortening the length of it, and now it's correctly set to the measure. So if you ever go over the edge of the measure that you're recording into, it's no problem. Just zoom out a level by pressing and turning this knob, shorten it, and then everything is back in sync. We might also want to play with the XY mix over here. I'm going to use the Faderfox for this. Now again, the Faderfox can be configured to send MIDI control code, control change information into the Deluge's synth engines, but we can also send it out to external synths. Now let's automate recording this mix parameter, which you see if I turn here on the Faderfox, you can see the mix parameter changing over on the Digitone because it's going through the Deluge and back out the other side. Again, let's automate recording that into this track here. First of all, I have to map it to one of the Deluge's internal controls so that it will know to actually look out for these control change messages. So again, I'm just going to map it to the filter cutoff here just because it's a handy one. And now I've recorded in the automation on this knob being turned here into this track. So now when we play it, just open up the filter here. You can see it there. So that shows how you can automate modulation on recording modulation into the Deluge to use with external synths. You can, of course, do this with the internal synth engine on the Deluge or even audio tracks. So, for example, let's just mute a few tracks here and take a listen to that audio track. Remember, this was the drum loop we programmed in. Now, say I want to actually put some effects on this. You can do that with the Deluge. Even though it's an audio loop, we can still apply filter cutoff to it. We can apply internal effects from the effects engine. Like a chorus effect here. Adjust the rate down, increase the depth and the feedback. Now I can actually go ahead and apply external controllers to some of these. So for example, let me map this parameter here to the audio tracks filter. So to do that, I'm going to select the filter frequency here, press the learn button, turn this knob. You see learn flashes on the screen, and watch the lights now as I turn the controller. Coming into the club. There we are. We're all the way in the main room now. Now let's apply to the depth or the feedback level here of the chorus effect. Again, I'm going to press learn. I'll use this knob. And we might also have a play with the resonance. So this shows you how easy it is to use external controllers to control both external synths, the internal synths, and also record automation onto the Deluge. And if you have synth controllers, for example, that are both keyboard and pads. So for example, the Minilab Mark II here has both knobs, pads for triggering samples, and also keys. Or for example, the Sakai MIDI Mix here, which is great because it has faders. It's USB controlled, but that's not a problem because you can hook it up here on the USB port. This is another one that's ideal if you're traveling and you just want a small controller in your backpack, or you have a small table set up. This is great for doing fades, chorus, reverb sounds, mapping it into synth engine parameters or audio track parameters on the Deluge. Now let's combine the Deluge with a MIDI controller like we talked about previously, and in this case I'm going to use the Faderfox EC4 like before, and I'm going to combine it with my small modular case here. I like doing stuff with modular, and I think the Deluge is a great sort of brain to bring modular systems to life. Oftentimes you find yourself missing a key sound, or maybe you want to add drums in, which can tend to be quite expensive when you're working with modular gear, but because you have kits and you have all the samples on the Deluge, you're able to use it as the backing track, for example, or perhaps the rhythm track, and then focus the modular in on what it does best, which in this case is creating crazy, mad sounds that will be very difficult to replicate with the Deluge's synth engine. The first thing you've got to realize is how exactly are we going to talk to the modular, because it uses, well, apart from an awful lot of cables, it uses control voltages to represent pitch information, and it uses gate information to represent clocking, or often a note being sounded on and off. Luckily, the Deluge has got gate and CV outputs. It has 2 CV outputs here and 4 gate outputs. Now, the text on my Deluge is kind of scratched off. You're going to have to trust me, they're right there. And the gate outputs map to the CV outputs. So the first 2 gate outputs here, 1 and 2, map to CV tracks 1 and 2. Now, why would there be 4 gate outputs when we only have 2 CV outputs? Well, the 3 and 4 outputs on the Deluge can be set up as a run-stop signal and a clock signal. And in this case, what I've done is output 4 here on the Deluge goes into the clock input on Pamelas New Workout here as the master clock. That means the same clock tempo that's coming out of the Deluge will be clocked into Pamelas, and so my modular will stay in sync. Output 3 is configured as a run-stop signal. So output 3 goes into the purple line here, goes into the run input on Pamelas New Workout, and Pamelas is great because you can give it a clock and a run, and then it stops and starts playing as soon as you hit play on the Deluge. Okay, now how do we actually send note information from the Deluge to the modular? And that's where the CV tracks come into play. CV track 1 here, for example, will send output to pitch information to CV1 output. And you can, of course, still use things like the arpeggiator. So I have the arpeggiator turned on this track here to send arpeggiated pitch information out of the CV output. And CV track 2 here sends out to output 2. So the CV track 1 is this green output, and I have that patched in over here to the first oscillator on the twin waves, the volt per octave input there. And output 2, what I'm doing is I'm patching that to the volt per octave input on this MCO oscillator over here. Now I've set up the modular in a kind of an unusual way. Pamelas is handling the master clocking, but I also have a sequencer here, the Mimetic Digitalis, which I'm using to sequence the second oscillator on the twin waves, and also generate some modulation values to patch into the filter here, so we can actually have some fun with modulating the filter really, really quickly. So how do we get the sound out of the modular? Well, normally you would just patch it into your audio interface, but say you had run out of inputs on your audio interface, or you didn't have one, you were sitting outside and you were jamming away with your modular and your Deluge, making one of those outdoor ambient jams that everyone loves to do. Well, the nice thing is the Deluge can also use the line in as an audio source, so we can create an audio track. You can then press learn on any of the pads on the blank track, and you can select the input source, and that's where the Deluge is going to get the audio signal. Now what's going to happen is, when we put our headphones on, we will actually hear the output of the modular through the Deluge's output, and it'll be mixed in to the Deluge's output, which means basically we are getting one final stereo feed, mixing together the audio from the modular with whatever we're playing on the Deluge. And best part is we can actually treat this like a regular track on the Deluge, and we can adjust the volume, we can apply a filter, we can even apply the built-in special effects to that audio that's coming from the modular rig. You may prefer to work in a DAW and use your external synths as instruments which you sequence from your DAW and then record the audio back into it. Let me show you how to do that with the Deluge. We're going to unplug our USB hub from the previous example, and I'm going to plug in this USB cable which I have hooked up to my computer, and so the Deluge will now receive MIDI from Logic. Next, I go in, I create an external MIDI track, and I'm going to set the MIDI destination to Deluge Out, and I'm going to choose a channel which won't conflict with anything, so channel 7 here. Now that we have a new track, we have to map the Deluge synth. I just press Learn and Audition Pad, and then press a key on the keyboard, and that will send the MIDI notes to the Deluge over the USB connection, and the Deluge will learn the MIDI. But first, let's send the MIDI clock and transport out to the Deluge. Open up your MIDI project settings and go to the MIDI sync settings and be sure to set the destination to Deluge Out, and also to put a tick under the clock output, and also put a tick under the MIDI timecode transport option here. And this will send timecode and clock, so we'll have start and stop messages sent to the Deluge whenever we hit play in Logic. I can drag more of these MIDI sequences in from my timeline, from the browser into the timeline, and build up a nice melody. Now let's hit play in Logic and hear what it all sounds like. You can hear the synth engine in the Deluge just playing away, and we also have drums as well. Well, hopefully this video gave you some ideas that you can go experiment with using your Deluge as a heart of a hybrid synth setup, using MIDI controllers, external synths, modular gear, and even integrating with a DAW. So I want to say thank you very much for watching, and also a huge thanks to Bo for inviting me to come on his channel.
Thank you so much, SynthDad, for exploring the Deluge here with us today. And as always, if you like his content, be sure to give him a follow. I'll link his YouTube down in the description and other socials. And as always, have a great summer, have a great vacation, and I'll see you sometime in August, I think.